Back in the summer of 1999, Carrie Simpson was a college intern on the trading floor of a Houston, Texas-based energy company, watching numbers scroll across giant screens.
Had no idea what any of it was. I learned quickly what a megawatt was and a world of buying and selling power that previously I didn't know existed, but was really fascinated by.
The trading floor itself was like nothing she'd ever seen, and the energy was electric.
Back then in 1999, I'd compared it to like mission control. Everyone's all spread out, big monitors. And yeah, there were yelling of, oh my gosh, this utility, they're short power. Let's go find them power.
Carrie's fascination with the fast-paced world of power trading led her to one of the most notorious companies in American business history. After graduating in 2001, she joined Enron as a power trader.
I was so excited to work there. I grew up in Houston, went to school in Boston, was able to come back to Houston and work for this company. Walked in and they had banners all over the place saying, ask why, be the world's leading company.
Enron was a supersized version of her internship, a trading floor that felt like mission control for the entire American power system, with the reach and ambition to reshape how electricity was bought and sold nationwide.
It probably was more like what you envisioned from the 1980s in terms of wheeling and dealing and lots of jokes and banter across the floor. It was exciting and it was very competitive. And so you wanted to show the people you were working with that you were a contributor. There was this desire to kind of show that you knew your stuff, or at least you could figure it out and help the company do well.
But all that bravado and ambition, it came with a price.
Shares of Enron today continued the downward spiral, falling nearly 30% as the company struggles as it goes into bankruptcy. At company headquarters in Houston, employees spent much of this day cleaning out their desks.
So it collapsed about 6 months after I started, and it was really just kind of disillusioning to me because I was so excited to work for this company that had all this potential, and then all of a sudden kind of everything was ripped out from under us.
The collapse of Enron left Carrie questioning everything she'd worked toward.
There was just this black cloud over the industry that I didn't feel good about it, and I wanted to do something else.
So Carrie traded power markets for lesson plans, teaching government and economics at her old high school. But she still found ways to incorporate bits of her old life into her teaching.
I did a day every year on Enron. And it'd be like, okay, today's Enron day. I'm going to teach you guys about what we did at Enron, what I did, ask me questions. And it was really fun because it wasn't that far removed from the Enron collapse. And so the teenagers were like, they really got into it and asked a bunch of questions and were able to connect it back to economics.
But Carrie realized she didn't want to teach forever. At her core, she's an energy nerd. And the pull of the energy industry eventually brought her to one of the biggest market-building efforts in the United States today. This is With Great Power, a show about the people building the future grid today. I'm Brad Langley. Some people say utilities are slow to change, that they don't innovate fast enough. And while it might not always seem like the most cutting-edge industry, there are lots of really smart people working really hard to make the grid cleaner, more reliable, and customer-centric. This week, I'm talking to Carrie Simpson, the Vice President of Markets at Southwest Power Pool, a regional transmission operator, or RTO, in the American West.
I help the utilities on the power grid, those with generation and load, to optimize their portfolio to best serve the customer economically and reliably.
Southwest Power Pool is currently building a new service called Markets Plus. It's a day-ahead and real-time power market that will allow Western utilities to coordinate resources across multiple states when it launches in 2027. It's a big step toward bringing the kind of coordinated power trading that has worked so well in the East to the West, where utilities have largely operated on their own. Carrie is a key player in developing Markets Plus. But before we get into that, I asked her about her re-entry into the power sector and how she ended up at Southwest Power Pool. From power trading to public school teacher, then back to power and utilities. So what brought you back in 2007? Was there a moment that you realized that as much as you love teaching, you wanted to get back into the energy space more directly?
So I had moved to Oklahoma. I was teaching in Oklahoma. That's a long story. The local utility there was looking for a planning analyst. And I'll be honest, when you're teaching, particularly at that time in Oklahoma, I doubt it's much different now. The economics don't work out real well. You're not making as much money, right? And so I was like, maybe I'll go back into the industry. I know what megawatts are. Maybe they'll hire me. Maybe it'll be different. And what I learned is it was very different from my Enron experience. And that utility, I was in a resource planning role, and I got to learn about how a regulated utility gets evaluated for what generation portfolio they need and how the states evaluate them. It was Empire District Electric Company, and they're regulated in 4 states. So I learned about state regulation. And in the same sense where I was fascinated as an intern, several years earlier, I discovered, wow, this industry is not just buying and selling power. There's a whole other world to this, in the planning side and being a prudent utility to serve your customer.
And that role led you to Southwest Power Pool when they were launching their imbalanced market. What was your first exposure to organized markets like?
Technically, my first organized market exposure was at Enron. I just didn't know it. It was buying and selling power into PJM. I told this story recently. It's kind of cool. All of a sudden, I could just move power there, and they would just pay me this price at LMP, and I could just go find it. In the bilateral world, you had to pick up the phone and negotiate with somebody, so you didn't know if you were really getting a good deal or not. And so at Empire with SPP and Energy Imbalance Service Market, it exposed me to more of what that world is and the organized market world is, and started to learn more about how LMP is calculated and the why and where it came from and scuck and sked. And I told my husband at the time, I was like, I really find this fascinating. They're about to launch, their next phase is to do a day ahead market. I want to be in the middle of that. And so we picked up and moved to Little Rock, and I took a teaching job at SPP originally. I was a trainer. They combined my teaching background with my power background, had me train operators. And then eventually I found my way into market design and started with that as we did our integrated marketplace development.
And then in 2016, you decided to kind of add another piece of the puzzle and joined an investor-owned utility, starting to work at Excel Energy in Colorado. How did that experience inform your understanding of Western utilities needs?
Stepping into the West was fascinating to me because I had been in the East where they had organized markets. They had a day-ahead market, multiple of them. The West had the new energy imbalance market that CAISO had launched, and it was doing well, but it was still so balkanized compared to the East. And that was enlightening to me because it helped me better understand the challenges with that, but also helped me translate for folks in the West that were wanting to understand markets, because I could help translate those concepts to them. And then I learned that the West is, there's the Mountain West, there's the Desert Southwest, the Pacific Northwest that are all very different, but they all have to work together. And so it was the collaboration needed in the West. I think being at Excel and the roles I had there helped me discover some of the unique challenges of the West. And really, it's ironic, it goes back to the energy crisis in 2000 that Enron was also a part of, where people were afraid of the organized markets or regionalism. And so it helped me get a better sense of, okay, this is what happens when we're 20 years later, and in the East, they've got all these markets, and the West is still kind of chipping away at trying to figure out how to work together. And I don't know, it's helpful perspective, and I'm grateful for my time in the West because it's been fun to help them and also learn from them of kind of when things in the regional sense can go wrong, like how you can make it better and how they're approaching it.
So let's dig a bit into the work you're doing today. And I'd like to start with the basics. So what is Markets Plus, and why does the Western United States need it, in your opinion?
Yeah, so Markets Plus is a day ahead in real-time market offered to interested balancing authorities and customers within those areas that want to optimize their generation and load. Why does the Western United States need it? Organized markets have demonstrated for decades now tremendous value in pooling generation economically to help reduce the costs to serve the customers. And the West is still very much separated. You've got 38 BAs, and you got a buy and sell power like we did back at the turn of the century. Right now, for most of the West, they have an energy imbalance market that has had great success, including the SPP Weiss that we've had. And so they're ready for the next step. And I think they're all open to it. It's just about the how. And so I think Markets Plus is good for the West. It creates an opportunity for these utilities to take the next step into organized markets from a real-time market where they are now, adding the day-ahead feature. And then it's like another step towards working together and coordinating together ultimately will lead to greater benefits to customers.
So because we've talked about imbalanced markets, for context, how is a day ahead and real-time market different than an imbalanced market, maybe in simple terms for our listeners?
Sure. So an imbalanced market, you plan what you're going to do for the next hour, how you're going to serve your load, perhaps with your own generation or what you've bought from a neighbor. But because power is always happening instantaneously, you may not have used as much load over an hour as you had expected. And so what the energy imbalance market does is it basically covers for when you've kind of overscheduled or underscheduled what you expected, and it pools the generation that's participating in that energy imbalance market to figure out where should the next megawatt of energy come from. It just basically stacks the generation economically. And so what ends up happening is if you end up buying a few megawatts from the market, then those few megawatts will be at a price that's based on an economic algorithm. And so that provides value, because otherwise, prior to energy imbalance markets, you might only have one option. It might just be the price of the balancing area and what they were able to provide that difference for. So that's kind of a oversimplified way to talk about imbalance. A full day ahead in real-time market means I'm preparing for tomorrow, so all day tomorrow, not just this hour, but for 24 hours. And I'm putting in my plan of what I think is going to happen and what I'm willing to sell my generation at. And now the market is optimizing that all together. And you're going to settle pretty much all of it. And it might be that my neighbor has more economic power than me for tomorrow, just because of the circumstances of our operations. And it may make more economic sense for them to serve my load than for me to serve my own load. And when we're all pulled together in a giant market, the market provides the pricing and the rules and basically the vehicle, the structure, to make sure that I pay my neighbor and that they're happy to have served me, but also that I'm happy because I've been able to serve my customer most economically. So that's the day ahead. And then the real-time piece is now, since you're going from what we thought was going to happen tomorrow to what's actually happening today, there's this constant update to it. And that's where now it kind of becomes its own little energy imbalance market, but compared to what happened day ahead. And so it's just a robust way to serve the generation portfolio to the load across the region.
So the value of organized markets, seems clear. And yet, as you mentioned, the West has been a lot slower to adopt these organized markets compared to the East. What's changed? Is there kind of a single thing that's made utilities in the West more open to this approach?
Yeah, I get asked that a lot, and I've heard people answer that question different ways. And the way I think about it is, over the past 20 years, they've had the time to look and see what's happened in the East and the success of the markets there. They've had the opportunity to experience the success of the energy imbalance markets in the West and see the value there. And then the energy transition, I think, has played an important role, where before you could use your own generation to serve your own load. There wasn't a variability factor to the portfolio as much. We're looking at solar forecasts, we're looking at wind forecasts. And if it's really sunny in the desert Southwest and it's really hot in Colorado, for example, it may make perfect sense now to, instead of curtailing the excess solar that's being produced, to sell that excess energy to Colorado. So it's a way to actually support the transition to more renewables. As transmission gets built and everyone's more connected to each other, the markets support that efficiency.
And so you returned to SPP in late 2022, specifically to help Markets Plus come to life. What was your role in making this vision a reality?
Yeah, so I came in, the team had done amazing work at putting together a draft proposal. They'd been working with utilities around the West. And when I came in, it was, okay, well, how do we do this? How do we bring this to life? And the first thing was we wanted to know, like, are customers really interested? Was this a thought exercise? Or do they want to bring this to life? We weren't sure if the utilities were committed to do this. So we said we can draft this into a tariff and file it at FERC. But to do that, that's a lot of work, and it will cost $9.7 million of staff, of meetings, of launching our governance. And we needed commitments from utilities to fund. And so we put out that proposal. My job was to work with utilities to see if they're interested and ultimately help them determine whether they wanted to sign on for what we called phase one at the time. And then we got enough parties to sign on. And so then the job was, now we got to do it. We have funding. We have serious partners to bring this to life. But ultimately, you've got to draft a tariff. And so my role was, I was director of Western Services Development, I think at the time. And my job was to take what had been put together in the proposal, launch that governance, help launch that governance, and bringing a whole bunch of stakeholders around the West in a room together for the first time. It was in April of 23, and showing and demonstrating to them, this is how SPP does governance. This is how we go through a policy, and this is how we draft tariff language. So we had to really help bring them in and get them to buy in to, okay, you're going to be attending meetings where you're going to have to vote on policy. And that was something that was really unexpected for me, is that I had taken for granted in the East, in the RTO, the utilities voted on everything. If you're involved at SPP at all, you know that any market design change gets voted on. And with Markets Plus, it was almost like pulling teeth to get people to take votes, because they had never had to like publicly state their position on something. But I think what that did is that brought in more of the collaboration and the compromise and trying to come to solutions. So we had to draft the tariff. That was a year-long process. Ultimately filed it at FERC, and then ultimately get FERC approval. And now we're about to launch the implementation of it.
One of the biggest milestones was filing the tariff with FERC in March 2024. I can't imagine it's an easy process. At GridX, we're involved in rate and tariff design, know how complex that can be. So maybe describe your process for pulling that together. What were some of the biggest considerations when drafting the tariff?
The stakeholders made it clear to us that they wanted it to happen quickly. They were concerned about our process taking too long. And I think we drafted our marketplace tariff over the course of several years. And so the stakeholders were like, you know what, you guys have a day-ahead market already. Can we leverage what already exists and what has been successful? It's been in production for 10 years. And so we did that. We took the East marketplace tariff, or the RTO's tariff, and copied and pasted it, basically, and started with that and said, okay, this is how we do it in the RTO. SPP's market design was heavily influenced by MISO's, which was heavily influenced by PJM. So it's not like it was some very different animal. And then we understood and were listening to what was different about the West and kind of hearing the different voices. And so it was like, let's take this tariff and then identify what needs to be different and changed because of West regional differences. So we focused on those. And over the course of several months, we basically modified the SPP RTO tariff, marketplace tariff, to incorporate the needs of the West.
What were some of those considerations for the West that was vastly different from the East?
Well, the fundamental differences is we're in the RTO. The RTO is the balancing authority, is the transmission service provider. It's all regionalized under one operator. Markets Plus is a day-ahead and real-time market that functions on top of multiple balancing areas and multiple transmission service providers, all with different approaches to doing things. And so we had to make sure we respected the autonomy of all of those BAs and TSPs, while at the same time figuring out how to make the market mechanisms be as optimal as possible so that people get the value. That was probably the trickiest complication to work through. And then in terms of like policy differences, GHG, state of Washington being involved and their policy was really important to figure out. So we got that in. Congestion rights. We do not have a financial transmission rights market like we do in the RTO. Instead, it's all based on firm transmission service and the allocation of revenue. The Pacific Northwest is involved, and they have a whole lot of hydro, in case you don't know. And some of the intricacies related to the dams that are all interrelated with each other. So we had to add some of that. And then we had to figure out how to incent transmission providers to let market participants in the market optimize the grid as much as possible, actually optimize the wires instead of a contract path limitation of, hey, you can only have 50 megawatts to optimize, when really there might be 200 there and available. We had to come up with something called the transmission usage charge, and we were able to do that. So just things like that, and I could probably rattle off a few more, but it gives you an idea.
Markets Plus received FERC approval in January 2025 and is set to launch in 2027. So first of all, congratulations. But I also know the job is not done. So what happens between now and then?
Between now and then is what we're calling phase 2, which is implementing. So I'd like to compare it as we've drafted the plans for the house, but now we got to go build the house to live in it. So that launches now. We have something called the Markets Plus Change User Forum, where parties who want to participate and be market participants and buy and sell on the market, they have a place to plug in, learn about what they need to do. It's all the technical requirements. That's what's going to happen between now and 2027.
We call this show With Great Power, which is a nod to the energy industry. It's also a famous Spider-Man quote, with great power comes great responsibility. So Carrie, what superpower do you bring to the energy transition?
I think my superpower, I feel like I've talked a little bit about it today, is being able to hear where different people are coming from and helping them see perhaps that they're not that far apart on ideas and intent, and helping translate some of the more complicated issues in a way that people can understand. And I think that helps with collaboration. And so part of what I'm proud of with Markets Plus is we brought a whole bunch of stakeholders into the SPP governance structure, even though it was a little bit different structure, and help them work together to figure out a really important design and tariff design. And one of my roles in that was helping them to understand each other and explain market concepts in a way that they could also engage in and make really helpful, informed decisions on. And so from my view, my superpower is helping people work together.
Awesome, Carrie. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really enjoyed our conversation. Carrie Simpson is the Vice President of Markets at Southwest Power Pool. With Great Power is produced by Gridx in partnership with Latitude Studios. Delivering on the clean energy future is complex. Gridx exists to simplify the journey. Gridx is the enterprise rate platform that modern utilities rely on to usher in our clean energy future. We design and implement emerging rate structures, and we increase consumer investment in clean energy, all while managing the complex billing needs of a distributed grid. Aaron Hardick is our producer. Ann Bailey is our senior editor. Stephen Lacey is our executive editor. Sean Marquand composed the original theme song and mixed the show. The Gridx production team includes Jenny Barber, Samantha McCabe, and me, Brad Langley. If this show is providing value for you, and we really hope it is, we'd love it if you could help us spread the word. You can rate the reviews to Apple and Spotify, or you can share a link with a friend, colleague, or the energy nerd in your life. As always, thanks for listening. I'm Brad Langley.